Good morning, everyone. My name is Benjamin Salazar, and today I'm joined by my colleagues on behalf of the Privy Council Office, Marhama Sohail, Menka Belanger, Valeria Mendez, and Alicia Ahmad, to propose Canadian Shield, a national security strategy for 2026 to 2030. Next slide, please. The issue with Canada's current national security framework is that it was created in 2004, grounded within the context of a time of more conventional threats to national security. Countries around the world with national security strategies have maintained timely updates to adapt to climate change, rapidly evolving technologies, and global health emergencies, and Canada's lack of a foundation has left us unprepared to respond to this environment. This feeling resonates far beyond Canada's security community, with a large majority of Canadians expressing fear for the future due to a wide range of interconnected, immediate, non-conventional threats coinciding with a world order that has regressed away from international cooperation. If Canada is to be prepared for the current scope of threats, it must reform its approach to national security to meet the demands of a rapidly evolving threat environment. Next slide, please. In order to narrow down the threats to Canada's national security to create a focused national security strategy, we have carried out a highly deliberate threat assessment to identify where to intervene immediately. In this process, we have aimed to strike a balance between political feasibility, stemming from jurisdictional authority and public sentiment, strong consideration of budget constraints, as well as what can be achieved on a 4-year timeline, and urgency due to immediate consequences of non-intervention, while also taking into account existing priorities and initiatives from the federal government. Conducting this threat assessment has allowed us to identify the 3 most urgent threats that can be effectively prioritized and mitigated within the time horizon of a national security strategy. Next slide, please. From our threat assessment, the 3 priorities that we have identified are shielding Canada's Arctic sovereignty from global competition, shielding Canada's democracy from foreign interference, and shielding Canada's economy from vulnerability. In prioritizing the threats of global competition over the Arctic, malicious foreign interference, and economic vulnerability, we aim to create a modernized national security strategy that will shield Canada from the most urgent security threats of today and the future. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll be passing to my colleague Valeria to discuss shielding our Arctic.
Thank you, Ben. Our first priority is clear: shielding the Arctic. This is a central region to Canada's national sovereignty, prosperity, and security. It represents 40% of our landmass, making it a core part of our strategic territory and therefore responsibility. For decades, the Arctic has been treated as distant and secondary, but today, climate change has completely changed that context. The Canadian Arctic is warming at 4 times the global average, transforming sea ice patterns and opening waterways that were once thought inaccessible. Just between 1990 and 2019 alone, vessel traffic in Canadian Arctic waters has more than tripled, a clear signal that global interest is accelerating. As access increases, so does competition. Russia, China, and the United States are expanding their Arctic footprint, a reality underscored by rising tensions around Greenland's sovereignty. Russia alone operates roughly 50 staffed Arctic bases, approximately 6 times more than Canada. This growing imbalance exposes gaps in Canada's ability to assert and defend its already contested claims. Sovereignty is not something that can be declared once and assumed forever. It must be continuously demonstrated, reinforced, and defended, and that is why the urgency is now. Our bottom line priority is quite clear. Canada must build and sustain a credible, year-round active presence in the Arctic because presence is the affirmation of sovereignty. Next slide, please. Our intervention to demonstrate visible presence in the Arctic is based on 2 tools we already have: CANCAP and Operation Nanook. First, we aim to scale up Nanook. These are Arctic missions currently run by the Canadian Armed Forces that bring together Canadian Rangers, federal partners, and international allies to conduct domain awareness missions across the North. Scaling up Nanook increases visibility and operational readiness while also reinforcing collaboration with northern communities. To support Nanook, we will also use the CANCAP program in conjunction. The Canadian Contractor Augmentation Program is a tool that allows the CAF to quickly deploy infrastructure and operational support through private sector contracts. It has a proven track record in harsh and unfamiliar environments, enabling immediate on-the-ground presence. In fact, internal audits show that CANCAP has been critical to meeting deployment timelines previously thought impossible in past missions in Afghanistan and Bosnia. Only together will these tools allow us to act now, not decades from now. Over the 4-year mandate, we will measure success through clear KPIs. At least 10 total bases plus are expected, which is an increase from the current 8 existing ones up north. And as CANCAP is phased out, this interim dual-use infrastructure will be returned to Northern and Indigenous communities, ensuring lasting local benefit. Our second goal will be to increase to 6 to 8 Arctic operations a year, an increase from the 1 to 3 that are currently annually run right now. This will signal to allies and competitors that Canada is serious about its Arctic sovereignty. And finally, while permanent year-round presence is a long-term goal that is projected to take 15 to 20 years under the recently announced Defense Industrial Strategy estimates, we cannot afford to wait. And that is why, in the meantime, Nunuk will deliver presence and CANCAP will sustain it. Next slide, please. Estimated costs for implementing this solution are roughly $3 billion based on prior CANCAP projects and budget 2025 projections. This plan does not require new spending envelopes, but will instead align with Canada's existing NATO defense commitments and budget 2025 allocations. With that in mind, we are quite cognizant of the fact that Arctic objectives cannot be achieved through infrastructure alone. Success depends on collaboration with Northern Indigenous communities who are the eyes, ears, and knowledge holders of the region. Implementation will follow 4 key strategies. Our solution will leverage Indigenous businesses to ensure Arctic investments generate local economic benefit. Secondly, we will expand CAF college partnerships and Canadian Ranger and youth programs to address recruitment and capability gaps. Third, we will develop dual-use facilities that serve both military operations and communities, with those interim hubs being transitioned back to local control once no longer required. And finally, a thread common to all reconciliation efforts is inconsistent engagement of Indigenous voices in decision-making. We aim to maintain continuous consultation through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee Forum and other tools to ensure that Indigenous perspectives shape Arctic strategy. All in all, this strategy will clearly provide benefits that go beyond defense to support community self-reliance and sustained presence and sovereignty on the world stage. With that, I will pass it off to my colleague Marhama, who will speak on shielding our democracy. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Valerie. Foreign interference has severe consequences for Canada's democratic integrity. The issue must be a top-tier national security threat across mandates, laws, and decision-making. We have had instances of interference in our democratic processes before. India targeted the 2021 election by providing financial support for its preferred candidate. Recent polls from CSIS also showed that 61% of Canadians are very concerned about foreign interference in our elections. Another incident occurred in February 2023, where senior officials from CSIS, Global Affairs Canada, the Privy Council Office, and others met and decided that foreign interference intelligence must be shared with the Prime Minister. However, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister at the time ultimately decided not to. The issue is that Canada knew there was something going on, but our agencies could not agree. Foreign interference is not only an attack on the government. The 61% shows that it's also an attack on public trust, it's an attack on democratic legitimacy and national sovereignty. The question, however, is, from a machinery of government perspective, how ready are we? A 2024 parliamentary report found that there are 4 key governance gaps in Canada responding to foreign interference. The differences in thresholds across departments, like in the February 2023 example, an absence of robust tools, limitations on the usage and dissemination of intelligence, and lack of effective communication with partners, namely parliamentarians. The absence of clear thresholds is what prevents us from moving forward in our response. It is the elementary component to create a domino effect for change in the long term. If we are meant to be a nation defined by democracy, we must shield it. Next slide, please. As noted, there is disagreement on what is considered foreign interference. This makes us both siloed and stagnant, leaving us democratically exposed. We saw this in the February 2023 example where agencies could not agree. To fix this paralysis, Canada needs one foundational piece, a shared threshold framework. The immediate outcome of this is an increase to the briefings to the Prime Minister. Tier 1 relates to undeclared foreign interference, which is covert or deceptive conduct. The action for this would be to permit national security agencies, namely CSIS, to monitor and surveil. Tier 2 is coercive or deceptive interference that actually targets democratic institutions. Tier 3 comprises of threats, intimidation, sabotage, or economic espionage and interference. This includes those that target research, supply chains, and financial institutions. As noted, the increase in briefings to the Prime Minister is not small nor intangible. It signals that one of the highest authorities in government is aware of this esoteric threat. Next slide, please. In terms of implementation, we've identified policy tools and authority. We propose that the authority be vested in Cabinet. This would be through an order in council, which is the only way to bypass legislative amendments to the CSIS Act, to the Criminal Code, and to the Security of Information Acts, to name a few. However, we do foresee a few challenges. Namely, there are challenges with interagency cooperation given how large the federal network of foreign interference responders is. There are also cultural barriers that have been long-standing in the federal government. There are risks of politicization of the issue, given that we are clearly demarcating thresholds for classifying foreign interference intelligence. There is also the issue of an absence of robust legislation. However, all of this can be circumvented through an order in council because Cabinet comprises of the executive, with coordinating and enforcement authority, again, vested in Cabinet, that can provide a clear directive. In terms of communication, there are considerations around the need for clear messaging, the need for consistent communication, especially given the large amount of federal actors, again, in responding to foreign interference. In terms of costing and funding, the source of funding is not new. It would be from existing departmental envelopes. We estimate it to be approximately $10 million in administrative context. The expected outcome is a whole of government approach that ensures coordinated response. The immediate outcome is to brief the Prime Minister, and this is not purely symbolic. It is the only thing we can do given that we lack other infrastructure like robust tools. Without doing this, we cannot even begin to respond to foreign interference. And without this, Canada cannot prevent infringements on our democratic institutions, and we cannot deal with issues like the intelligence versus evidence debacle. With that, I pass it off to my colleague Menka, who will now speak on shielding our economy. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Marhama. That's correct. Right now, it is time to shield our economy. To quote Budget 2025, the nexus between economic security and national security is now clearer than ever before. In the second quarter of last year, when tariffs were first announced, our exports plummeted. And that was not a one-time dip. Today, more than half of Canadian manufacturers are still feeling the shockwaves. At the same time, a vast majority of our exports go to this single market. Slow growth and concentrated exposure make Canada more vulnerable to external economic pressure. For decades, economic integration through free trade was our strength. But in a world of rising protectionism, economic dependence is a vulnerability. The rules-based trading system that allowed for Canadian prosperity for 30 years is eroding. Major powers are now using trade, technology, and supply chains as tools of leverage. As a middle power, we cannot out-leverage larger economies. To mitigate these challenges, the federal government is currently championing efforts to expand our trading relationships with countries around the world. But we cannot diversify overnight, which means economic security and national security are now one and the same. To reduce our exposure to external shocks and restore durable growth, we must build production capacity at home in the sectors that matter most. Next slide, please. That is why we are introducing a Made in Canada stream within the Strategic Response Fund, henceforth the SRF. This allows us to direct capital towards strategic sectors that directly reinforce sovereignty. That includes dual-use advanced manufacturing, defense infrastructure, and climate security technologies. Dual-use capacity allows one investment to serve multiple national security objectives. They have the ability to simultaneously reinforce defense, climate, energy, and supply chain resilience. We are targeting Canadian firms willing to pivot into these areas and scale their domestic production. There is a $2.5 billion allocation over 4 years. The primary source of funds is the existing SRF envelope, coupled with a portion of money pledged towards domestic defense production in the Defense Industrial Strategy that was released this week. The strategy calls for the scaling of domestic production capacity and reduced foreign dependency. This stream operationalizes that mandate. Support is conditional. Firms must meet domestic production thresholds, retain Canadian intellectual property, and demonstrate measurable gains in output per worker. The SRF is not a new program. It uses an existing contribution instrument administered by Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. No new legislation is required. Cabinet and Treasury Board approval will allow this stream to be integrated and provide accountability. Next slide, please. Of course, any policy that involves incentives will not come without its risks. But this intervention mitigates these risks from the beginning with built-in safeguards. To prevent opportunism, funding is outcome-based and primarily structured as repayable contributions. This is deliberately different from Canada's traditional innovation model. Programs like the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit reward research expenditure, whereas this stream rewards production, scale, and outcomes that serve Canadians. Clawback clauses are embedded upfront in cases of relocation outside Canada or failure to meet agreed-upon commitments. To prevent concentration, we maintain a sector and firm spending caps and require a minimum private capital contribution. And to prevent various forms of overreach, large agreements will require Treasury Board approval, spending will be reported to the public annually, and the stream includes a 4-year sunset clause, renewed only if our aforementioned performance indicators are met. The outcome is greater certainty for Canadian firms, increased investment at home, and measurable productivity gains in the sectors that are most critical to our sovereignty. Building up resilience at home strengthens our credibility abroad. Boosting our own production allows us to be a more reliable trading partner and an even better ally. With that, I will pass it back to my colleague Ben to outline our communication strategy.
Next slide, please. Finally, our strategy for communication and public engagement. Historically, Canadians have not felt included in conversations surrounding national security. Addressing this is critical in any new national security strategy that is tabled. Many Canadians lack awareness of the national security threats we face and seek transparency about government decision-making. Due to these issues, we must engage in dialogue with Canadians by fostering a climate of trust that centers Canadians and their needs. This process of civic engagement will span horizontally across all threats to national security, including those beyond the scope of this strategy, to ensure that there is an understanding of how these issues impact Canadians across the country on a day-to-day basis. Fostering a climate of trust requires creating a space in which there are no barriers, a consideration that is especially important for Canadians who may be disproportionately impacted by these threats. This engagement mechanism will be spearheaded by a third-party review commission composed of community leaders who are aware of local issues and will attract participants through trust. Since this body is the reviewing agency of this strategy, it will regularly report to the public to ensure transparency and engagement. Recognizing the key role for such a commission to be distinct from the government is important to further this climate of trust. With this strategy, we expect to make a substantial improvement in public confidence in the government's ability to recognize and address security threats facing all Canadians. Next slide, please. Looking to the future of Canada's national security, Canada must adapt to respond to new threats that span far beyond current definitions of security. Through shielding our Arctic, shielding our democracy, shielding our economy, and engaging our public, the Canadian Shield creates a modernized framework for national security in Canada, aligning with the common priority of strengthening and protecting us from threats both at home and abroad, as well as reinforcing our ability to be a capable and reliable ally to the global community. To conclude, we'll leave you with a quote from Prime Minister Mark Carney: "If we need a more secure world, we need a stronger Canada." Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
We are very, very thankful that you got up. So you're our third team today. From a personal perspective, I am a Queen's graduate, somewhat before your parents were born, so it was a long time ago. But we're very, very thankful you did this. And a lot of what you talked about relates to strategic implementation and and risk. And I'm going to pass that over to my colleague Violetta to ask the first question.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for this team from Queens. Very enlightening presentation. Now, your strategy is very ambitious with many risks and interrelated parts, which you noted as well, and dependencies across various sectors. My question to you is, which risks did you consider most significant? How did your interpretation of these constraints shape those key trade-offs you ultimately made and choices?
So I can take this one. I mentioned in our threat assessment that we wanted to find a common ground between the issues that are not only the most urgent, but as well as the ones that kind of pose the least political risk if we intervene with them now. So this resulted in us picking the strategies that we did, as we believe that they are sort of the most feasible in the short term, while also being highly urgent. I'll just speak to the plan for the Arctic intervention. One of the big risks there that we identified is the fact that it highly leans on the private sector for the supplementation of military capacity. And I actually did a deep dive on some research on how the CANCAP program was utilized in the past. There was an audit conducted that identified a lot of the risks, and many of them pertained to the fact that the chain of command between the Canadian Armed Forces and the private sector is sort of unclear. So that is something that will need to be addressed as well if this program is to be re-implemented. If anybody else wanted to speak more to their specific topics, they can feel free to jump in.
Thank you.
I guess just to continue with that, just to kind of round it out, we really wanted to make sure that we did not do any, we wanted to consider all of our threats and make sure that we were not making anything that would not be politically feasible in the current sort of environment. So that's kind of was our approach to the threats that we chose and the approaches that we took.
Very good. And it's one lens across all of those interventions. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of what your policy talks about, particularly in the Arctic, relates to Canada's allies and adversaries, and some of the issues around the international aspects of this. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Vincent to ask a question.
Thanks very much, Noah, and thanks to all of you for the presentation. Yes, I will ask you a question on the Arctic, and I'm just curious. You came up with a couple of specific recommendations with respect to OPNANUC and CANCAP. Could you tell me if you looked at any other options in terms of how you would want to enhance sovereignty protection of the Arctic? Those are two programs that are already in place. Did you look at creating anything new? Did you look at anything innovative with respect to other allies? What else was on the table for you with respect to the Arctic, and why these two specifically? Are these the two that provide the most value added, in your view, for Canada stepping up in the Arctic?
I can speak on this. There are actually many solutions that were tabled at one point, and that's just the nature of case competition. You look at all the possible choices. Something that we were first kind of playing with was enhancing the Maritime Surveillance Committee forum that's existing. And so that was going to be a solution that was more focused on the mechanics of government and how we could go about it in a governance way, making sure that the 5 departments that currently have jurisdiction over the Arctic, be it transport, fisheries, and ocean, and the other ones identified in an Auditor General report, they currently work in a disjointed manner. And so one of our possible solutions was going to be looking at that and how we could find some coordination amongst all of them. But I think the solution in which we landed on, like Ben mentioned, after tabling all of our solutions, was the one that we thought would be most feasible in the time the 4 years given, and just with all the tools that we had in mind, it would be easier to bring in something and augment a program that was already existing rather than start from scratch. In addition, we looked at maybe some procurement strategies, but again, that expanded past the 4-year timeline that we were looking at, right? And so that was another aspect that we took into account. On your note of international allies and all of that, the Nanook missions actually do a really good job of involving a lot of different actors in their missions, not only Canadian Rangers and so the Indigenous community at that point, but also they bring in a lot of international allies into the missions. And so we thought that it was going to be quite a robust solution where we can involve a lot of Canada, but also make sure that we were presenting ourselves in an international kind of sovereignty manner as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. One of the most impactful things you talked about, engaging the public and the importance of engaging the public. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Christina to ask a question.
Thank you very much. I find it interesting that you set the engagement of the public, or the forum for engagement of the public, in a commission. I'd love to know more about your choice as to why a commission versus other alternative approaches to engaging the public, and whether or that is the sole means through these different options that you're moving forward that you would engage the public.
Yeah, I can take this one. My colleague really enforced that concept of the climate of trust, and that's really what our communication strategy is trying to achieve. We want to make sure that the public doesn't feel as though this is a national security strategy that's being imposed on them. It's rather something that they have the ability to actively engage with, to provide feedback on, and do so in a way that they feel like is constructive and actually contributes to our strategy. And so our commission achieves that by creating a little bit of distance directly from the federal government to increase the amount of trust that citizens feel. Because when we were doing our research, we found a lot of figures that show that currently there is a climate of mistrust amongst Canadians towards the government, especially around issues like this. So our communication strategy, we really wanted it to be a two-way conversation, not a one-way conversation. And we figured that the commission that's arm's length from the government, involving community leaders such as respected Canadians that already make an impact in their communities, those people can help foster that climate of trust that we are trying to achieve.
Any follow-up question for that?
Just wondering what alternatives were considered.
I can speak to this a bit more. So my piece specifically was on countering foreign interference. There have been actual questionnaires from the government on countering foreign interference, specifically with the Criminal Code, the Security of Information Act, for example. However, we know that foreign interference disproportionately targets diasporic communities, right? So one of the considerations that we had was making it a government approach rather than a third-party review. However, third-party review, as Menka and Ben noted, increases trust because, again, for example, with diasporic communities, they are disproportionately impacted by foreign interference. And in that way, it's a means of mitigating that this is an imposition from the government onto them, especially, again, considering that there are marginalized communities here, not just diaspora communities. There's also the Indigenous community piece that Valeria really touched on in the Arctic solution. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We only have about a minute and a half. I'm going to ask you a very specific question about your second. In very small number of words, I'm trying to better understand the actual implementations and actions related to your democratic implementation. Like, what are the specific things to address this risk?
Yes. So first and foremost, it's the fact that in the federal government, from a pure governance approach, from a pure machinery of government perspective, there is a lack of coordination and agreement on what counts as foreign interference and what must be made to the Prime Minister. We have the public protocol incident for elections specifically. However, that is public facing. It's not internally facing. So I talked about the February 2023 incident where, agencies could not agree with each other and eventually did not make it up to the Prime Minister. There's also another incident where Global Affairs Canada and CSIS could not agree with each other, even though Global Affairs Canada does not have foreign interference statutory in its act. So the point of this is to increase the number of briefings that's happening to one of the highest authorities in government to create a ripple effect, because this is what we could feasibly do in 4 years. The case asks for a renewal strategy. That would mean amending the acts, amending the mandates, and dealing with the wicked problem of intelligence versus evidence. And I hope that answered your question.
Thanks so much.